Let's talk about the next subtypes. We talked about dominant, creative. The next ESFJ is called the normalizing subtype of ESFJ. What does this look like?
So this is the opposite of the creative. And we might, I don't know, I think we might recognize these qualities and characteristics in the ESFJ stereotypes a little bit more. Although these types might also mistype as perhaps introverts or even thinkers. Ooh. So the normalizing subtype is a more conventional and specialized style. They're careful, they're concerned, friendly, professional. They fit well with society and in very familiar roles. And in Linda Barron's vernacular, they have a more chart the course style. They are linear thinkers, so they have very step-by-step thinking. They're grounded in their senses with a lot of body awareness. They're more auditory than they are visual. Creative types tend to be more visual. Normalizing types tend to be more auditory, and that holds true for the normalizing ESFJ. They're mindful listeners and speakers. So this is a more patient, a more kind of chill vibe ESFJ in a patient, thoughtful, considerate way. They also have a very solid halo like the dominant ESFJ does, meaning that they fit well, they understand societal expectations and they fit well in those expectations. And they generally have a giant database of knowledge and memories in anything that they're specialized in. So they might choose the job, the job or career path they're on, or maybe it's just something that's a side hobby. But they're the kind of people who suddenly discover that they know more than everybody else about this one particular thing. And that's because they just create a huge storehouse of information around their specialty. And when anything new comes along, unlike the creative ESFJ that is way more open to novelty and possibilities and new things, the normalizing, that's when they throttle and they put on the brakes. That's something that needs some time from them to really get used to this novelty thing, this new thing that came out of feels like it came out of left field. And when they do that, just like they create that database of experiences and memories and information about anything that's a specialty, they'll pull on that same strength to understand this new concept. And they'll put it very carefully against everything that they've ever seen around this subject. Once they get that new idea, it's a massive aha for them. So if they do accept a new concept, it's kind of it's a big deal like they got it, but like for them, it's a big deal. It usually changes things for them a little bit when they really do understand this concept that may have felt so far out of left field. And they go, no, this fits with everything else. I see this pattern.
Yeah, it's almost like the normalizing ESFJ is a river over time, that something might be introduced that's foreign to that river, but it gets absorbed. It's almost like that's the metaphor I see. It gets absorbed into the river and just can be part of the stream of things once it can be adjusted.
Yeah.
And I think that this subtype also lends itself to a longevity. Like you're going to find people in, like I think you mentioned, potentially long career tracks, unlike maybe the dominant who's seeking results in the outer world between people or things they want to do, and the creative, which is looking for the new shiny creativity to latch onto. This normalizing's okay with sticking with something for a period of time,
right? Letting
it develop, letting things mature and develop over time, and just incorporating things on a long timeline, becoming more and more specialized. And kind of the steady wins the race mentality.
Yes, exactly. Although they can get used to new things in a certain, like let's pretend a normalizing ESFJ is really into fashion.
Yeah.
And they understand that new fashions come all the time. And so they're tracking for that. So it's not like they're going to throttle the change of fashion, because that's the nature of fashion, is that it alters and changes over time all the time. It's just in those areas in which things are well established. That's when that, like you mentioned, they're looking for something for the long haul. They're looking for things that really stick.
Yeah.
And so when new ideas really get inside their mind, when something is like lights up their brain in novelty, Dario calls it a buzzworthy new idea. It usually is something that's very exciting to them, and they might even act on it almost immediately, interestingly enough.
Well, and I mean, you are an ESFJ listening. Even if you're a normalizing ESFJ, you still have that quirky creative spark in you. It's not like you don't, I mean, the creative subtype's not the only one of the subtypes that has this. So I think for this normalizing, things like hobbies, things outside of work that can bring you joy and spark some of that creativity and those those quirky offbeat elements that every ESFJ has that want to come out. There's a container for that. I think you can create a whole life of hobbies and other activities with people that can help you express some of that inside of you.
Yeah. In fact, actually for the normalizing ESFJ, they are usually not that ambitious with their careers. And the reason why is because it takes away too much from community and family.
Yeah.
A lot of normalizing subtypes are very career oriented, but the ESFJ really wants to make sure that they're balancing home life and work life. And so they're not going to be necessarily as ambitious as a dominant ESFJ. They're going to get a stable situation and they're going to pour into their community and family. And so like you're talking about those hobbies, that's part of it. That's all part of having a rich life outside of just a job or a career.
Yeah.
And you're right. And those things are really important to them. In fact, a couple of things that are noteworthy is that they like a beautiful, cozy home. They appreciate animals, craft work, music, and nature. So a lot of hobbies like that are very cathartic for them, things that'll kind of let out a little bit of steam. They are good administrators as a general rule. When we talk about, of course, we're talking about careers, not just home life. So when you go over to the career side, yes, home life is important. Creating and establishing that stability is important. But when it comes to their job, they're also going to be very conscientious there. Dario says that they can be friendly enforcers of norms and values, meaning that they will bring in a stability into the career, just like they have in their regular home life. And sometimes it can get some pushback from other people, right? If they're friendly enforcers of all the protocols, sometimes people feel like they're a little too pushy about protocols, but they're doing it for a really important reason, right? They want to make sure that they're honoring what has already been established.
And ultimately getting needs met. I mean, ultimately trying to make sure everybody can interface well with harmony.
Exactly. They're there to help stabilize environments, and they prefer smaller environments. I mean, sometimes they're in large companies, but large companies can sometimes get too large, right? Usually they want something a little bit more manageable, a little smaller community, something where they can observe themselves having a positive, stabilizing, contribution.
Yeah.
Although there was one note that I thought was interesting is that they're personable and bring daily cheer with an occasional side helping of dark humor. So this is where that quirkiness probably comes out.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, they also, just like the creative ESFJ, is like, how did I create this drama? A normalizing ESFJ will sometimes create drama as well, but as opposed to being confused by it, they're doing it to let off a little steam.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. A strategy.
Yeah, it's like a little dramatic outburst or a little rebellion that surprises everybody around them, and that's just to let off some steam.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the jobs they might cluster around.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing these are going to be more, the creative was more maybe solopreneur or like on your own kind of creative support. This is probably going to be a lot of like connect to a company or an organization type careers.
Well, and I think they're going to be supportive careers too.
Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to more in the lead like the dominant or more of the creative artistic expression with the creative. This is going to be more support oriented. So the list is, again, not comprehensive, but academic counselor, customer service specialist, dental hygienist. Wasn't that on your list? Registered nurse, executive assistant or secretary, occupational therapist, librarian, pharmacy technician, veterinarian or veterinary technician, social services case manager, home health aide, school counselor, medical office manager, nutritionist or dietitian, and childcare provider or early childhood educator.
Yeah. I think this subtype of the 4, and we're going to get to harmonizing in a moment, but I think this is going to hold true even when we get to harmonizing. This subtype here, because they understand this is a subtype that's very tuned into how things happen in like the regular world, like organizations, support roles, the economics of it, like the economics in a broader term. So I think this is the subtype that struggles with things like emotional labor the most because they're an ESFJ at the end of the day, going to a job that they get value compensated for. But there's so much stuff that happens with that harmony driver or dominant function of harmony, extroverted feeling, wanting to get needs met. ESFJ just can't help themselves. It doesn't matter if it's not necessarily quote unquote on the job description or they don't get paid directly. An ESFJ is most likely going to show up and want to offer support and help. And then eventually, if that's done enough without a return, there's a little bit of bitterness or resentment that can form around it. I'm doing all this emotional labor for everybody at the office. Who's going to take care of me, damn it? Like that kind of feeling, right? It's almost like this, nobody's noticing what I'm doing between the cracks, right? Between the job.
Yeah.
And so I think this subtype probably struggles with that the most. And so that's maybe just something, if you find yourself here, just have an eye on your boundaries and the ways that you're overextending, the ways you're overgiving maybe as an ESFJ, that you're not getting a return on that. And so you might want to be mindful of it and just have that awareness, especially if there's a subtype.
Yeah. The normalizing ESFJ says, I'm not sure if I'm okay with you swearing, but thank you for doing it in behalf of me.
Fair enough.
That's right.
Fair enough.
Yes. Perhaps you're using salty language, sir, but I do appreciate the sentiment.
You get it, right?
Right.
Neurotransmitter of choice is serotonin. So this normalizing subtype is going to be more associated with serotonin than the other chemicals. And let's talk about the mental wiring of those two functions. Extroverted feeling, harmony, driver, dominant. Introverted sensing, memory, co-pilot, auxiliary. How are these attuned?
Okay, so for those of you who are the type geeks that understand what Joel mentioned, because we said we wanted to keep it accessible for those of you who are new, but also put a little bit of technical jargon in there if you're more of a type geek. It is the opposite orientation from the creative subtype. So in this case, extroverted feeling or harmony as a first function would be more analytic. And then introverted sensing or memory as the perceiving auxiliary function would be holistic. So it's the reverse of the creative.
Which makes sense, having more standards, should statements, values around how the external world, the judging nature, extroverted feeling or harmony should happen, being more holistic or open about the perceiving elements of it all.
Well, and I think the reason why this makes sense to me, and I know I've had conversations with people at times that said, wouldn't that be in reverse? Like, wouldn't the introverted sensing be more analytic for a normalizing subtype? For those of you who are type geeks, just ruminating on it for a moment. I think the reason why it tracks for me is that when your perceiving function is holistic, it means you have a more receptive experience with it. It means that you're going to be more open to messages of how the world should be set up, as opposed to being more assertive and having more of like well, I think it should be set up this way. You have more receptivity to worldview. And so if your perceiving function is the one that's holistic, you're going to get more messages from society because we're constantly being socialized. You're going to receive these messages from society about worldview, and you're going to feel a need to, sort of support that and continue to be open and receptive to messages from society about worldview. And then you're going to take your judging function, your decision-making function, and that's going to be more analytic. Now the information you took in with your perceiving function gets championed by the judging function of setting it up and matching those societal expectations. So it makes sense to me that the normalizing subtype would have a perceiving function that's receptive and a judging function that's more analytic or assertive. But that's just for the type geeks out there. We can move on and get back to an accessible place with the ESFJ type.